Good afternoon and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this IT governance webinar on using international standards to improve cybersecurity in the Asia Pacific region. My name is Alan Calder. I'm your host and main speaker for this evening. And for those of you who joined us on Friday morning for what didn't work out quite so well, my apologies, and I hope that today will be much more like what we'd intended Friday to be, and will work smoothly all the way through. You will have noticed that you're all muted when you come into the webinar. That's because we found that background noise and so on can be very disrupting for other attendees. If you need to ask questions or raise any points, there are two very straightforward ways that you can do it in this GoToWebinar platform. The first is in the chat function at the bottom of your stack of functionality. You'll find a line called chat. If you click on that and open it up, you can type messages in there which we can all see. And the second is through the questions function. If you open that, you can type a question in there and we'll pick it up. And if you have questions that come up during the webinar, please do use either one of those functions to lodge the question. We'll either deal with the question as you raise it or in the Q&A session at the end of this afternoon's webinar. In all, we're going to be about an hour, about 45 or 50 minutes hearing from me, and then 10 to 15 minutes available for Q&A on any of the issues and topics arising from today's webinar. So, who am I? I'm, as I said, Alan Calder. I'm the founder of IT Governance, which I set up some 12 years ago to be a single source supplier of pretty well everything that one might need for dealing with the governance of IT, and in particular the what is now called cybersecurity, information security. One of my fellow directors and I led the world's first certification to the pre-runner of what's now ISO 27001. It was BS 7799, and we did both an unaccredited and an accredited certification to that in the late 1990s as the standard became first a code of practice and then shifted to become a specification. Since then, we've helped 150 odd organizations, probably more now, to achieve ISO 27001 certification. We work with companies around the world, both through our consultancy business and through our publishing and training businesses, and so quite a lot of the content of this webinar is drawn from the input of clients and colleagues working around the world, and for today's webinar in the Asia Pacific region specifically. I'm going to be talking today about the cyber threat, looking at some of the recent high-profile data breaches and what lies behind them. A brief overview of some of the current legislation. There are a number of changes to data protection legislation, with more coming as the world increasingly recognizes that there is the need for effective legislation around personal information in particular. And then we'll look at the international standard ISO 27001 and see how that supports organizations addressing the broad information security challenge, and in particular the risks that are related to cyber threat. So the current cyber threat in 2014, the whole of last year, there was something like 1,500 data breaches. That's individual organizations breached. This is, of course, reported figures. So the unofficial estimate is that the unreported level of data breaches probably outweighs the number of reported breaches by about 4 to 1. So 1,500 individual organizations admitted that there'd been a data breach of some sort that was serious enough to be reported, and this meant that some 1 billion records, almost entirely personally identifiable information, but names, addresses, payment card data, social security numbers, that type of information, compromised during the course of 2014. The average cost of a data breach in Australia rounds out about $2.8 million, and of the organizations responding to our and other surveys, approximately 70% believe that approximately 70% believe that cyber attacks are the biggest threat, or one of the three biggest threats facing their organization today. And that's very much in line with the national risk strategies of organizations like the European Union, of the United Kingdom, in America, all of which see cyber risk as a top 3 or top 4 strategic risk for the organization. The same thing is quite clearly the case across the Asia-Pacific region. India, for instance, has adopted very specific regulations around dealing with cyber risk, as has Australia, Singapore, and we'll touch on some of those shortly. 61% of organizations in the Asia-Pacific region expect a cyber attack in 2015, but only 43% are prepared. And I have to say that to a simple person like me, that seems slightly unusual. If you're expecting an attack, it would make quite a lot of sense to prepare and to then check that your preparations are adequate, particularly when the average cost of a breach could be in excess of $2 million. 76% of organizations responding to the survey in the Asia-Pacific region detected security incidents in the past 12 months, an incident being something that may or may not have led to a significant exposure of personal information or of privileged confidential records, and 63% of organizations say that they will increase their security budget over the next 12 months. And that again is sensible because the size and scale of the cyber threat is going to increase probably even more quickly than that over the next 12 months. Just as an example of the way in which the cyber threat landscape is changing, as mobile phones have become ubiquitous, with many people now having 2 or more mobile devices, and 87% of iPhone top 100 apps have already been hacked. 97% of Android top 100 apps have been hacked. The pleasures of open source software make it easier for hackers to break into that software, but it means that when you log into the iTunes store or the App Store looking to download one of those apps, there's a reasonable prospect, particularly if it's free, that it's going to come with something that's not going to be perfect for your mobile phone and your data. And that's an example, in a sense, of how in just 5 or 6 years, as mobile devices have become ubiquitous, so mobile devices have become one of the fastest ways for hackers to access personal information. And because so many mobile devices are able to log on to corporate networks in some form of bring your own device policy, hackers are able to get through the mobile device and into corporate data behind the corporate firewall. There are 156 million phishing emails sent every day, and of course we all, being intelligent, sensible people, believe we know what a phishing email looks like because it's poorly written. It originates in some country that's got a tradition of being a fount of phishing scam emails, like maybe Nigeria. But the reality is that phishing emails over the last 12 to 24 months have become highly sophisticated. Extremely difficult to recognize a phishing email and differentiate it from a non-phishing email, even more so when the attacker has taken over the email system of one of your small suppliers and taken it over long enough to send out a series of targeted emails that carry in them a single link to enable you to download a small piece of malware, which once on your network will trigger a contact with a command and control center outside the organization, leading to a significant exfiltration of data. And taking over a small unprotected supplier is increasingly an interesting way of attacking large organizations, and one that both organized cybercrime and nation-state actors see as an increasingly interesting route for attack. And very difficult for anybody in a large organization, when they receive an email from somebody they already know in a supplier, to determine this might be a phishing email. 15 million of those phishing emails are making it through spam filters every day. That's a significant chunk of emails which you have to make sure staff are able to identify, differentiate between and respond to, and the average cost for a stolen record in Australia again is $145. So the costs of failing to look after information security effectively amongst staff is high, and the risks of being exploited are equally high. So when you look at how do these breaches occur, the reality is that there are a number of ways in which attackers take advantage of organizations. In 42% of data breaches, the cause was basically a malicious or criminal attack. And as we'll see shortly, you don't have to be a large data-rich organization to be the target of an attack. Many small and medium organizations are themselves, for perhaps obvious reasons, also targets of attack, and often more favorite targets of attack than much larger organizations. 30% of organizations, the cause of the data breach was a human error, and the compromises of confidentiality, integrity, or availability of data are always known as a data breach because data is leaked or it's compromised or it's destroyed. And 30% of those are caused simply by human error, an issue which can be dealt with partially through better technology and process, but primarily through much better staff training. And then, of course, there is human error. Then of course there is system glitch, which can be dealt with through much better testing, much better rollout and pre-release capability in organizations. But three root causes of data breaches, and the organizations which are exploited, particularly those that are victim of a malicious or criminal attack, the key route in is failure in existing preventive security controls, where the attacker has been able to evade or avoid controls put in place specifically to stop them coming in. And there are a number of reasons why attackers are able to avoid controls. Partially the controls themselves are out of date, but the root cause of that perhaps is the lack of in-house expertise, the reality that most organizations simply don't have enough competence and skill around cybersecurity. If they do, it's not necessarily completely up to date, and where they do, they may be struggling to respond effectively to risk, partially because of poor leadership, both in the C-suite, so CIOs and CISOs who may not necessarily be able to exercise the leadership that they need to, and of course boards not paying appropriate attention to the size of the cyber threat and the need for them to provide clear direction to the organization about what should be done. So poor leadership, incomplete knowledge of where sensitive data is stored makes it easy for attackers to lay their hands on critical information. In the recent Sony pictures breach, as an example, it turns out that someone had a terrific file containing all of the passwords for many of the systems, all in unencrypted text, all of it easy to get hold of, and you would have thought that that was a sort of data which would be encrypted if it was held at all. But an incomplete knowledge in terms of designing a security system about where that information was held might have been one of the causes why it was so easy to steal. Data should be classified, should be treated in a way that's appropriate to its classification, a collection of passwords, assuming that the CIO or CISO needs to have a file full of related system passwords. Well, classifying that data as highly sensitive ought to lead to it being encrypted and stored under perhaps two-factor authentication, perhaps in a segregated or partially segregated network. Often the reason for these types of breaches is a lack of accountability, the belief that actually you're not going to get sacked because of a breach, or the reality that nobody knows who's actually accountable for protecting particular types of information. And all of those, alongside the failure to deal effectively with the supply chain. Remember, we're talking here about reported causes of breaches, where organizations have said, we had a breach, this is what we've been able to tie it down to, and therefore the reality is probably much worse. In only 35% of organizations with a lack of in-house expertise, and in only 20% was it a failure to properly vet the supply chain, usually the information security supply chain. So just looking at a couple of case studies, in the Philippines in November 2013, a local hacker group linked to the online hacking group Anonymous hacked a number of government websites calling on the public to support a wider protest, and in November 2014 the Philippine branch of Anonymous was able to hack into another 11 government websites to express its general dissatisfaction. Quote from one of the Anonymous statements on a website: "Your governments have failed you, they sit atop their thrones and abuse their power." And while Anonymous might have that view, the reality is that they shouldn't have been able to hack a set of government websites, disrupt government services in order to share it. In February of this year, one of the Philippine government websites was compromised by an anti-ISIS hacker who posted a expletive-packed message against ISIS. And again, whatever one's views of individual political and religious groupings, government websites shouldn't be capable of being hacked in a way that disrupts the services that they're there to deliver. There was no formal statement from the government about the hacks, how they happened or what they're doing about it, but when you see a government that's had 3 hacks over the course of about a year, you can be pretty sure that the government as a whole is unprepared for cyber attack. They don't have effective measures in place to deal with it. They don't have contingency plans. They're not able to respond quickly and effectively to the hack. There's no real resilience, and of course that means that hacktivists go, wow, this is going to be fun. Let's keep on going back there. It's very easy to break in. These guys don't know how to defend themselves, and that makes it easy for us. And we see this time and time again in the cybersecurity environment, where governments and organizations that fail to plan can simply be accused of planning to fail. They've got nothing in place that enables them to deal with sophisticated attacks. They respond on a knee-jerk basis, try and recover from each individual attack, but don't take any strategic approach to dealing with the overall risk. And it's that, the strategic approach to dealing with overall risk, that's the key to effective cybersecurity over the long term. So the Lizard Squad, a hacking group who picture themselves as lizards in dinner jackets, have had a number of successes attacking websites and web services in the Asia-Pacific area over the course of the last few months. In January, they attacked the Malaysia Airlines website. On Monday, the 26th of January, there was a 404 plane not found message, an obvious corruption of a standard 404 server not found error, which appeared to be a DNS attack. It overrode server settings and redirected visitors to a Lizard Squad controlled page. And while the Malaysian Airlines were able to recover fully within 22 hours, that should still never have happened. Anybody looking for a Malaysian Airlines information page shouldn't be getting the merry message of a set of hacktivists who are making some particular individual protest. But like most hacker groups, Lizard Squad has many targets, and in February they hacked Google in Vietnam, again a DNS attack, and the visitors to Google in Vietnam, google.com.vn, found a photo of a man taking a selfie with an iPhone instead of the normal search engine. Again, not very good for Google's business, not very good for all the advertisers on Google who for a period of time would have had nothing happening through their highly expensive Google pay-per-click advertising. In February, the Lizard Squad attacked Lenovo, again with a DNS attack, and redirected users to a free Cloudflare account. So Lizard Group effective. These type of hacking groups normally not more than between 3 and 7 people. You haven't got here organized crime. These are simply hacktivists taking advantage of particular types of weakness, in this case DNS vulnerabilities, and they claimed attacks in the last year on Sony's PlayStation network, on Microsoft's Xbox Live network, among others. And the Sony PlayStation network was the cause of one of the world's biggest global breaches. So DNS Attack, as you know, DNS stands for Domain Name System, and DNS hijacking works by overriding the TCP IP settings already in place and redirect site visitors to the attacker's web page rather than by taking control of the actual target site. So it's a redirectional attack rather than an infiltration type attack. It usually doesn't cause theft, doesn't lead to theft of customer information. It simply disrupts the effective sites because the attacker has been able to obtain control over the organization's domain name and therefore over the traffic which the organization has coming to its website. Websites get brought back up. It's relatively quick and easy to do. It can take between 20 and 48 hours, depending on how quickly and effectively the organization responds. But the lack of security, that vulnerability, has already been exploited. The traffic has already been diverted, your reputation has already been damaged, and of course hackers have found a very good high-profile way to voice their opinions. 3 or 5 people able to take advantage of all the traffic to google.com.vn in order to express their particular view. Terrific way for a small number of people to reach very large audiences, and made possible by organizations whose basic security is inadequate. Sony Pictures I talked about earlier on. The most recent breach of a Sony Group company, was the November 2014 breach of Sony Pictures, where hackers broke into the corporate computer network, were able to do a number of things. They're able to release motion pictures, movies which have been shot but not yet made available, put them out onto the darknet, made them available for download from a number of torrent sites and other sites, so generally available to people for free, not exactly what a commercial organization is trying to achieve. Very substantial amounts of personal information about employees, details about families, emails, salaries, and in particular that made headlines, news about what particular producers thought about their stars. All of that was released to significant damage both at a personal and at a corporate level. Worse, a file of plain text passwords leaked online along with other credentials information, and a huge amount of marketing slide decks that Sony had spent, marketing team had spent time and effort putting together. Those too were leaked. And as a result, Sony staff were unable to use their computers, not able to do any practical work for a number of days. Sony postponed release of an upcoming film, The Interview, which was said to have been the trigger for the attack, and while in reality it appears that that movie made more money at the box office than it might otherwise have done, the reality is that Sony was simply incapable of protecting its information in a way that's normal. And that's not unusual for Sony. After all, it was breached about a year ago, major breach of the PlayStation network. Sony appears to have become one of those organizations which is simply up for grabs where hackers are concerned. While North Korea was blamed for the attack, tension with the US increased. Who needs that? Ex-employees have sought to combine their lawsuits against Sony into a single class action. Costs so far are estimated to have reached about $100 million. And the breach got as bad as it did because Sony executives, first of all, ignored ransom emails from the hacker group saying, actually, we can break into your network and we'll do you a lot of damage unless you do the things we want you to do. Don't release this movie. But they decided to ignore it on the basis that they thought this was probably spam. So the breach took place. Vulnerabilities were severe. The breach was relatively easy to carry out and major in its repercussions, and it took Sony a week to acknowledge that the attack had been successful. And all of that, as I said, is reflective of a generally lax approach, what appears to be a generally lax approach to online security. 76 million gamers' accounts were compromised in the April 2011 network hack. 250 million budget they've got to spend on cybersecurity, but it's clearly not being spent in a way that's driven to deliver effective cybersecurity across the areas where the Sony group has its most significant risks. And again, we see that as being typical of organizations once they've been hacked. There's a knee-jerk reaction, throw a lot of money at patching the last problem that occurred, whereas there needs to be a strategic response which identifies the core areas of breakdown and puts in place appropriate strategic responses that are proportionate to the risk and the value at risk and the vulnerabilities, and puts them in place on a structured and robust basis. So far we've talked largely about large organizations, but it's not just large organizations that are at risk, frankly. It's organizations of all sizes. And cybercriminals in particular like small companies. And they like small companies because small companies, and by that I mean companies of anywhere from 5 to 10 employees up to maybe 400 or 500 employees, because usually companies of that size don't have much in the way of dedicated IT security and support. They might have IT staff, they might have outsourced IT services, but they usually don't have much in the way of dedicated information security or cybersecurity expertise internally. Often organizations are using out-of-date server hardware and software. If you just look at the incidents, information about how many organizations around the world are still running Microsoft Windows XP, an operating system that has been withdrawn, for which patches are no longer being produced, and which therefore is kind of dead easy to hack into. But out-of-date server hardware and software are much more likely to be deployed in smaller organizations who don't have the ready cash perhaps to keep updating. The passwords and system accesses are often easily compromised because there isn't a significant investment in staff training, in password protection systems, in two-factor authentication. And websites often, particularly again for smaller organizations, are built on common open source software frameworks which are inexpensive. And because they're inexpensive and because the code is available to all, so vulnerabilities are also available to all. And in an era when a good exploit, a good piece of hacking code that can exploit a previously undiscovered vulnerability can be sold on the black market for between $250,000 and $500,000. The reality is that running anything on software that hackers can see how it's constructed, have access to the code, doesn't necessarily make instant sense. So small organizations with those particular characteristics often favorite targets for hackers because easy to get into, and small organizations often are part of a supply chain supplying large organizations. Small organizations have got lots of information worth stealing, lots of usernames, lots of password information, lots of payment card data, and you know, if you can steal information from 1,000 small organizations very quickly, it's probably easier and a more lucrative activity than trying to break into one large organization like a payment gateway, for instance. 60% of small organizations that have been breached closed down within 6 months, again because they simply don't have the recovery and resilience systems in place that enable them to get over a major breach very quickly. Their customers desert them, and unless they have a very wide spread of customers, losing just 3 or 4 large customers can take a smaller business out of action very quickly. So you would have thought in a world where cyber risk is as severe as it is that the board would be very well aware of what's going on. But the fact is that that's not so. 32.5% of boards get no information at all about cybersecurity activity inside their organization. They're flying completely blind as boards. They've got no knowledge or awareness of what cyber threats they're facing, how well they're doing at it. And gee, if you're an attacker, you don't need to worry about the organizations that take this stuff seriously. If a third of organizations worldwide, the boards don't know what's going on, it's a target-rich environment for a hacker. 38% of the remainder get a report only annually, and you can bet that most of those reports will be telling the board what a good job the IT team is doing in managing what threats it's aware of. The sad truth that the messenger who brings news about a breach is usually shot is a reason why in 29% of IT teams won't report a breach because they fear they'll be fired or in some other way disciplined. And the reality is that IT teams can't be solely responsible for security. Without a board commitment of resources and funds, without a board determination of what level of risk is acceptable and how, therefore, scarce resources and funds should be deployed, it's very straightforward for IT organizations to make the wrong call. And therefore, boards which abdicate their responsibilities around security are abdicating their responsibility also around management effectively of their IT organizations. Shortage of cyber security skilled staff is not about to go away. There is an expectation that the current shortage of cyber security professionals will grow to the point where by 2017, that's just 2 years away, there will be about 2 million cybersecurity professionals not available, not in the market, roles needed for people who can work in organizations to deal with data security, cybersecurity, ethical hacking, and so on. And this is not counting all of the bright but ethically challenged cybersecurity professionals who see a much more lucrative future for themselves on the dark side of cyber security. Bear in mind that organized cybercrime has its own very well established, very well organized cyber expertise. Nation-state operators have their own cyber forces that are capable of attacking other countries, both commercially and militarily. And all of those opportunities take cybersecurity professionals out of the commercial market. And the commercial market where we've got the most to lose and the most to protect is the one that most needs cybersecurity professionals. A recent ISACA report, 85% of the respondents said yes, there is definitely a shortage. They're struggling to identify what adequate cybersecurity skills look like, and at least in 50% of the respondents, they're going to increase the amount of money invested in staff training. And that would be staff training for qualifications from examination boards like obviously ISACA, like ISC squared with the CISSP, and similar for IBITGQ with the Certified Information Security Lead Implementer and Lead Auditor. Those types of qualifications are the qualifications that organizations should be looking for their own staff to acquire. You're going to struggle to recruit people who come to you with those skills other than at very high and increasing salaries. You're going to need to train your own staff. You're going to need to give them exposures and qualifications and competences that they need themselves. So retraining rather than recruitment is partly how this staff shortage issue is dealt with. And legislators are increasingly aware of the need for organizations to do something about cybersecurity. And I'm bypassing the debate over the extent to which legislators themselves should be held in check. I'm bypassing the conversation about whether it's acceptable for governments to be spying on their own citizens or on the citizens of other countries, and simply looking at the practical reality from the point of view of most corporations. So Australia recognized in 2009, when it put together a cybersecurity strategy, that it needed a framework to address the increasing risks from online attacks, and set out to build a framework within which businesses could operate securely and resiliently using the information, the ICT technologies that support the modern business. And if organizations, one of the ideas of the Australian cybersecurity strategy was that if every organization protected the integrity of its own operations and identity and privacy of its own customers, that would contribute to the country overall becoming a better place for cybersecurity. Problem is it's significantly out of date. 2009 to 2015, there have been major changes in the scale and size of the cyber risk, and Prime Minister Tony Abbott is at least pushing for a review of the strategy, but frankly it can't happen quickly enough. Hong Kong, another example of organization actually taking steps. So the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance, which has been passed to govern how personal data of Hong Kong subjects is looked after. There are 6 principles for data processors to abide by, the key of which is that practical steps have to be taken to ensure that personal data is protected against unauthorized or accidental access, processing, or erasure. And we recognize that from a European Union perspective as being very similar to the European Union's Data Protection Act requirement that organizations have to take appropriate technical, operational, and administrative action to protect personal data. And that means a combination in both the instances of people, process, and technology working together to protect personal information. The penalty for a breach is 5 years imprisonment, up to $1 million Hong Kong dollars worth of fine, with data users liable for any breach by third parties. So Hong Kong, its action, the Philippines, who we looked at in terms of breaches that took place more recently than the Cybercrime Prevention Act, which was passed in 2012 to prevent or address a number of forms of cybercrime and was applicable to organizations outside the Philippines as well as those in the area. And it met with controversy because it was seen as a heavy-handed undermining of free expression and privacy, which led the Supreme Court to put a temporary restraining order in place. And in February 2014, finally, the Supreme Court ruled a number of the provisions to be constitutional, including cybercrime offences, crime against critical infrastructure, such as electricity and utilities and so on, and misuse of devices. So shifting sands in the Philippines, but legislation is changing everywhere. Singapore had a Personal Data Protection Act in 2012, which again governs the collection and use of personal data by organizations, but this deals with personal data, not corporate data, similar to what we see in many other jurisdictions. There is a 5-year national cybersecurity master plan in place aimed at making sure that Singapore is a trusted and robust information communications hub by 2018. So we're some 2 years into that master plan, clear government focus and investment in cybersecurity, and then the recently amended Computer Misuse and Cybersecurity Act, which deals with unauthorized access or modification to computer material, requires organizations to take appropriate cybersecurity measures, and is punishable by up to 10 years in prison or a 50,000 Singapore dollar fine. More and more countries are recognizing that cybersecurity legislation of this sort either needs to be passed, or if it's been passed, needs to be brought up to date. There is a worldwide recognition that the compliance strategies need to carry significant fines because of the extent to which organizations that collect personal data try and avoid responsibilities when there's been a breach. And so the global shift towards demonizing organizations that fail to protect data, that ensures that they're damaged both through fines, potentially imprisonment of directors, and certainly through reputation damage, is a key unconscious strategy of regulators around the world to protect the personal information of their citizens. And in order to deal with cybersecurity legislation, the strategy is clear. You need a a strong information security management system in place. You need a way to respond to security incidents. There are going to be information security breaches, whether through evasion of control or through computer error, through glitch, or through staff error. So you need to know how to identify and respond to security incidents. And that almost certainly means somebody taking on the role of Chief Information Security Officer. That would be a full-time role in a large organization, and a part-time role maybe combined with other responsibilities in a small organization. But you need a CISO who's aware of current risk and is able to manage a strategic response to information security challenges. And of course, implementing industry standards is a key thing. The Poneman Global Report identifies implementing industry standards as one of the key steps that organizations that are beginning to deal effectively with cybercrime have taken to reduce the risk for themselves. So let me just look at international standards, or at, in particular, the international standard. The international standard is ISO IEC 27001. It's a standard whose origins go back to the late 1990s. This is the second revision of ISO 27001, the fifth revision in all since its very first arrival on the scene of the standard, and so it's become increasingly mature. It embodies best practice drawn from contributors and standards bodies around the world, and it's really a best practice framework for addressing the entire body of information risks, cyber risks. It encompasses people, processes, and technology, and recognizes that an effective information security management system needs to find a balance between those three methods, those three components of dealing with protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information on a systematic basis. So systematic means a structured approach to establishing, implementing, operating, monitoring, reviewing, maintaining, and improving the information security management system, but not just on its own, specifically tied to the organization's business objectives. Implementing an ISO 27001 management system is a relatively straightforward exercise conceptually. In reality, it requires knowledge and expertise, but in practical terms, as an overview, the steps are straightforward. You, having decided that you want to do it and committed resource, money, people, management commitments to the project, you determine the scope of the management system, what's in scope, what are we protecting and what are we not. In order to do that, you need to look at the context of the organization and the requirements of interested parties, which includes contracting customers, and it includes regulatory bodies and industry bodies and so on. And taking that into account, having appointed somebody to be responsible for information security inside the organization, you then carry out a risk assessment to identify threats and vulnerabilities and how those translate into risks, so that once you've determined your appetite for risk, you can prioritize which risks you're going to deal with. There's no point in tackling all risks at the same time. Some of them are not very serious, and you want to be putting your money into the ones where you've got the biggest exposure. Biggest exposure doesn't necessarily mean biggest vulnerability. It means greatest likelihood of biggest exposure being exploited in a way that leads to biggest damage. For each of the risks that you identify, you'd appoint a risk owner, somebody to be accountable for dealing with that risk. You remember that one of the regular causes for breaches, one of the ways in which vulnerabilities were exploited, was because no one was accountable. So you have a risk owner who owns identified risks. You put appropriate policies and procedures in place. That must include driving staff training through the organization, and the combination of policies, procedures, staff training, effective technology, all built around implementing the findings of your risk assessments, leads to a set of controls and results that you expect to help you achieve your business objectives. And you conduct a series of internal audits on a regular, ongoing basis to make sure the management system is performing as you want it to. Of course, continual improvements, making sure the management system does a better and better job, is part of what ISO 27001 requires. And as more and more organizations implement ISO 27001, so the benefits become ever clearer. There is certainly at one level better or more effective information security because the focus of investment on specific risks is better organized. That means if information security is much more cost effective. It means that organizations are deploying technology more effectively to achieve business goals, and business goals include not having disruptions just as much as they include undermining the competitors. And those kind of benefits can lead to better marketing opportunities, ranging from speed in completing requests for quote RFPs through to demonstrating credibility and commitment to customers and partner organizations as well as to staff. Of course, at a regulatory and corporate governance point of view, ISO 27001 is a clear demonstration that you've taken appropriate action to comply with your legal and fiduciary responsibilities to manage business risks because you've implemented best practice information security, something that's internationally recognized as being that. Those are the key benefits. Assurance to customers, employees, and investors that their data is safe and that as an organization you've taken appropriate steps to identify and manage all information security associated risks. You're fulfilling fiduciary responsibilities. And really, particularly if you're trading internationally, ISO 27001 enables you to demonstrate that you're meeting multiple compliance requirements. You can tailor your ISO 27001 management system to, for instance, meet the requirements of all of the jurisdictions within which you trade. So if you're trading across Hong Kong, Singapore, Philippines, Australia, and you may have exposures there, you can organize your ISO 27001 management system in a way that enables you to demonstrate that you are meeting those compliance requirements. And that's kind of why the number of ISO 27001 certificates is climbing. By 2013, there were nearly 11,000 organizations in the region that had an ISO 27001 certificate issued by an independent third-party certification body. And we're seeing all around the world now that rate of certification beginning to increase. We expect to see it increase somewhere between 7 and 10-fold over the course of the next 5 to 7 years. So we expect to see something like 100,000 organizations in the Asia-Pacific area become ISO 27001 certified over the next 5 to 7 years. Being led by large organizations who see their business benefit quite evidently. Google, for Google Apps, they see it as validating what they already knew. The technology process infrastructure provides good security and protection, says a customer, for the data they store in Google Apps. Amazon Web Services, who increasingly big chunks of the world depend on for cloud-based services, recognize 27001 as a way of proving commitment to security, as does Microsoft. It's an external validation to their approach to manage risk in a comprehensive and effective manner. So, to sum up, we've helped now 150 organizations achieve ISO 27001. We've sold toolkits that have been taken up by several thousand organizations to help them achieve ISO 27001. Information security lead implementer and lead auditor masterclasses have trained several thousand people from around the world. So we've probably had a hand in more ISO 27001 certifications around the world than any other organization. And that means that we can pitch a blend of tools and training in a way that enables our clients to get the best mix of products and services. And if you're looking at ISO 27001 and you're not sure where to start, we've developed a unique set of fixed price product service packages that enable organizations to find the best mix that works for them. And we deliver these internationally across the internet. We work with clients from West Coast America through to East Coast Australia, and our packages range from what we call the basics, which is the absolute basics, the copies of the standards themselves that enable you to work out what you're going to do and get on with doing it, through to a package which we call Get a Lot of Help, which is a mix of online training, toolkits, software, and consultancy-led, senior consultant-led mentor and coach, project management and assistance to guide you through each of the steps of implementing a management system. We can, of course, for much smaller organizations, do a do everything project. We implement everything for a fixed price, or we do completely consultant designed customized projects for more complex organizations. But most of our clients go for something like Get a Little Help or Get a Lot of Help as a package. They come with fixed prices, so we guarantee that if you take the package you will be ready for certification within the agreed time frame, and those prices range from, these are US dollar prices, $6,800 for Get a Little Help up to usually $16,700 for Get a Lot of Help. Currently, I believe until something like, yes, the end of this week, on offer for through our itgovernance.asia website, $14,995. For smaller organizations, what we call Fast Track, where we do it all for you, is available again on the same time period for under $8,000 US. So you can read more about those packages if they seem as though they're appropriate on our website, itgovernance.asia, ISO 27001 solutions.aspx. If you go there, you'll get a description of what's in each of those packages and how they work. But whether you decide to use one of our packages or go to some other method, the clear and present challenge for organization is you need to get cyber secure, and you need to get cyber secure as quickly and effectively as you can. Which brings me, ladies and gentlemen, to the end of what I was planning to say. I'm going to now answer questions. If you've got questions, please do type them into the question function here. What I'll do with each of the questions is I'll read the question out and then I will answer it so everybody knows what the question was. The first question is, can implementing ISO 27001 help meet our national cybersecurity legislation? The answer is yes, particularly if your national regulations include words like must take appropriate action to protect personal information. How do you determine what's appropriate? And the answer in most law courts is to say we draw on international best practice. We didn't make it up for ourselves. There is only one international best practice standard for information security and data protection. That's ISO 27001. So that's what we've done. How does ISO 27001 fit in with the PCI DSS is a good question. PCI DSS, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, is designed to ensure that organizations which process payment card data protect that data. PCI is a very specific standard. It has some 200 plus specific actions that you have to take. ISO 27001 is a principles-based standard which allows organizations to determine what controls to put in place on the basis of their own risk assessment. PCI DSS gives you no such latitude. It says these are the controls you have to put in place because we, the Security Standards Council, have determined what our level of risk is and what we're prepared to allow, and the answer is not very much. And ISO 27001 and PCI DSS are capable of being implemented in the same environment as part of the same management system. Part of what we as an organization do for many of our retail and e-commerce companies is help them integrate their PCI DSS compliance and ISO 27001 management system activity, so that the segregated part of their network that, for instance, deals with cardholder data is part of a broader management system that enables the organization to have a single strategic approach to managing information security. How would you implement ISO 27001 across APAC, country by country or all at once? And the answer to that depends very much on on two things. It depends on where information security and IT control sits, and it depends on what the IT infrastructure looks like. If you've got a IT infrastructure which is common across the whole of your APAC operations, and you've got a central driving information security function, I'd probably look at implementing information security across the whole region as a single step. If, on the other hand, you've got individual operating units in a number of different countries with, to one extent or another, control over their information security infrastructure, then I would look at implementing it country by country. But from a group or parent company point of view, I put in place a set of directives which set out minimum levels of standard operating practice or risk acceptance criteria, for instance, that you say you want to see all of the operating countries implement, because that enables you from a central perspective to ensure that information security is managed how you want to. What's the rough cost looking at for certifying to ISO 27001? Well, you've got to split the cost of putting an ISO 27001 management system in place from the cost of having an external organization, a certification body, come and do an audit and make and issue a certificate. For a small organization with approximately 20 employees, you might be looking at $3,000 to $4,000 US for the first year. For a larger organization, it could be $6,000, $8,000, $10,000. But the reality is that you're going to negotiate with 2 or more suppliers to get the best commercial price that you can for certification. It is a free market. It's not a government body that does it. Certification bodies work within an international framework, so they all perform to the same level, but they all have different commercial drivers and different pricing philosophies and approaches that you can take advantage of. What's the difference between IT Governance Limited and IBITGQ? It's quite significant. IBITGQ is an independent examination board. It creates exams. It creates and runs the examinations for certified information security lead implementer, lead auditor, some business continuity certifications and other certifications. IT Governance Limited is an approved training organization. We deliver IBITGQ accredited training, and we deliver that training both from classrooms in the United Kingdom. About a third of our delegates are from around the world, and we deliver it to delegates online. So, for instance, we have an online ISO 27001 class kicking off at 2 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time this afternoon. Not ideal for people in Asia Pacific. This one's more pitched for people in North America. What is that's the cost difference between ITG and IPG? Yeah, the answer is in APAC we have a presence because we have our .asia website, so you can buy all of our products and services through .asia. We have warehouses in Hong Kong and in Australia. We deliver books and tools from there to clients across the region, and we deliver internet-based training to clients across the whole of the world. So you could do IBITGQ accredited training courses through our online course without any problem. And ladies and gentlemen, that's kind of bringing us to the end of the time that we had scheduled for today. I've got time for probably just one more question if anybody has something which they feel is highly unanswered. No? Okay, so in that case, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found it a useful webinar. I hope you found some of the information around breaches. Some of it will at least be new to you, but as I say, the key message is do take, if you're not already taking steps, do take steps urgently and in a structured, robust way to ensure that you get your cybersecurity house in order. And if the information, products and packages on our itgovernance.asia website can help you, please do take advantage of them. Thank you very much for being here. I hope you enjoy whatever's left of your afternoon and evening. Thank you.